Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery, and over here you can see some of these lingering projects like the outdoor compost barrels, contents. Really nice castings in there. I've been holding on to that, trying to see if I can keep it damp, treating it almost like a cocoon nursery, assuming that there's going to be baby worms popping out there. I got a couple new buckets from my buddy. Still got to figure out how I'm going to use those. I got some ideas. Here's some new bins I built. I think they've been sitting around for over a week now, maybe 9 days. Here's some castings I got stored in these buckets below, and here's my typical composting arrangement of systems, buckets, tubs, all kinds of stuff going on here. I'm even trying to combat some insect situations, but what I've got in my sights for today is the oldest of my systems right here. It's what I refer to as my original population of red wigglers. It's been 20 days now since we initiated the attempt at migrating the worms out of the compost that they inhabit. So to try to reach that goal, we threw up a little partition of cardboard, and the cardboard's full of holes to allow worms to pass through, and we've been feeding only on this side now for the past 20 days. The first feeding went 8 days. The second feeding has now gone 12 days. 12 days since we last checked in on here, and I've got a little bit more food that I want to kind of bolster this feeding area with. I'm going to put that in here today. I don't know, we'll see how the bedding's holding up. I've also got a little bit of a bedding test going on in here, so I'm going to get my glove on, bring this system up to the bench, and we're going to get to work. Oh yeah, and while we're working, this thing's got to be turned off. It just makes way too much racket. So as I mentioned earlier, there's already been 2 feedings applied, 8 days, 12 days. The question mark just indicates to me that I'm assuming that this is going to continue. I'm assuming we're going to go in here and still see worms that need to be evacuated from the finished casting, so that the migration into the feeding area needs to continue, but for how long is the unknown. 20 days so far, not bad. I have had systems where the entire migration of the worms has completed in far less time than this, like in 2 weeks, 14 days. Those circumstances don't always apply. You know, the castings could have been very dry already at that point. I don't think that's the way we started here. I believe the castings were still pretty damp and cozy, as I remember. So, you know, really depending, I think, on the environment that we're starting with is got a lot to do with how long it takes for a migration to get finished. So I'm in no hurry. It'll take as long as it takes. But as far as its overall age now, 213 days, broken up into different phases as I like to do it, starting with naturally composting, followed by a period of foraging, about a month and a half here, as you can see, before we start feeding them again with the purpose of moving them. The food that they're going to get today is a pretty good sized combination of cabbage and carrots. It's sort of a prepared setup with which you can create coleslaw. Sort of ended up in the back of the crisper in the refrigerator and is now long past its expiration date. So it sat in the freezer overnight to give it that little slight extra edge when it comes to breaking down. It does seem to me like freezing stuff and then thawing it gives it a real good jump start for the breakdown process. Gotta say that paper covering that we've had on here has resulted in some pretty dry material out here on the top, and some of it even is finally starting to be able to crumble a little bit. Not much though. So, we didn't really want to, dry it out too rapidly, is the reason we maintain the coverings. Sometimes I wonder, how the drying process would go if we were to simply, not cover it whatsoever. You know what? If we're going to bump into worms here, it seems to me like, why not just take that opportunity and relocate them, If we want them in the collection area, as soon as we spot one, we might as well just put them there, right? And I've been doing this exact thing right here, is picking through the finished castings, locating worms, moving them individually. I did that on another of my systems that was also migrating, but there was something about that material. It was way wetter than this, or more wet. Or it wasn't even so much that it was more wet. It wouldn't be a problem if it was more wet. If it was crumbly like this, then I wouldn't worry, but that stuff would not crumble. So it made me very suspicious of that stuff, so I actually went in there and individually picked through the stuff, getting all the worms out of it, knowing that I probably left a whole bunch behind, but I also know that just the process itself would have resulted in, heavily aerated material. So if the material was starting to, run low on air, then it's, getting helped by that a little bit, I hope, the aeration. And I'm also glad to see that this material is real crumbly, because I know that in time it'll just get more so, a little bit drier, and a lot less appealing for these worms to want to remain camped out in. And, on the flip side, we're going to make sure that this feeding area where we're trying to lure them over to is going to be plenty damp. So I think we'll even include a little spray down. So let's skip the whole attempt at gathering worms we bump into. I do still want to aerate and get some of that more dry material blended in to help the stuff that it touches dry as well. But it does seem like on its own, the stuff is all very crumbly and getting there. I don't think I could have said that during the last check-in. So I really like the way this stuff is drying out. It was just in that other system where I felt the need to sort of do like an emergency pick through and haul out. I was not getting the same vibe from the material in that system as I'm getting here. Here the stuff feels great, and I won't be leaving it uncovered. I will allow for this drying to continue just the way it's been, kind of in a slow fashion with a pretty thorough covering, but of material that does allow for moisture to pass through. All right, these two guys are just making too much of a commotion. I had to pick them up. I couldn't just let them take over the show. All right, so I can't remember where I've already tilled up and aerated, but it does feel like what I'm pulling up here can also be crumbled up a little bit and broken down. I think that just this is what we're doing here, creating all these little pockets in between everywhere. I think probably also helps a great deal in the drying process. Here too, if I bump into like an old banana peel stem, I might as well throw that over there too. I wouldn't want to have any sort of, undue distractions remaining out here in this stuff that would want to cause them to possibly stay rather than bug out. I think what we also saw was that the material right here on the very edge was perhaps a little bit more damp than elsewhere in the system. And it kind of makes sense since we're keeping the feeding area nice and damp. Some of that moisture is going to make its way across the little partition we created here, and then help this stuff over here remain a little bit more damp than the material in the bin at large. But still, I'm going to blend that stuff in too. Give that stuff a little chance to air out a bit as well. Get some of the more dry stuff over there to the edge where it can, kind of equalize in moisture. So yeah, I really like the way the material in the system's looking. All the worms look good. They're not going to want to leave if they feel like this material's nice and damp and cozy. So this tilling up, I believe, is really going to aid in the slight drying of the material gradually and hopefully trigger a response in the worms that they're going to go seek out a more cozy spot. Now, as far as that cozy spot is concerned, that's our job, is to make that really nice and cozy. So I do believe we're going to increase its overall size, because while the surface area out here aiding in the drying of the material is great, I kind of like the idea of continuing to build this stuff out over here as more worms move in. I don't want them to feel crowded or anything like that, so I do want to, if possible, expand its volume. We're going to do just that here a little bit. I'm exaggerating here, and we're not going to go all the way out to here as far as its size, but I'm just shoving back way more than I need just to give myself work room so I could see what I'm doing here. And this whole partition thing is just more for fun, I believe, in a way. It's kind of cool to see it there. Although I do like the way that it keeps all this shrapnel out of the nice finished castings, because at some point that stuff's going to be considered as finished castings, and if we can minimize the amount of litter in it, I think that's just a good thing. So now, I was already thinking ahead here that it might be a good idea to be real ginger about moving this stuff over, because like I said earlier, I'm doing a little bit of a bedding test over here. The bedding that I was really curious of is, you know what, let me go grab a piece to show you. It's this kind of almost waxy paper that the individual rolls of toilet paper are wrapped in. And it's got this kind of slick feel to it. It's, I don't know what it is, Perhaps it is just really smooth, and maybe that's all I'm feeling. Perhaps there's no wax there at all. But I thought that it would be probably a good idea to give it a try here in this area where we know we're going to be causing a lot of worm traffic by putting the food over here. And I'm trying to remember where it was. I'm assuming I must have laid it down right beneath the foods. My hope was to be able to extract a piece of it to see if the worms are breaking it down. Although 12 days later, it might be hard to see any breakdown. So maybe there's really not a lot of value in ripping this whole thing apart just to get a look at some test material. We'll get a better sense of whether or not it's got nibbles and wear at some point in the future, but I just figured I'd make mention of the fact that that's there, and that's part of the reason I'm trying to be careful about not really disrupting what's here. So I mean, that's just whatever. If I put a tear into that stuff, I'll be able to tell that it was just me who tore it in half or something, but it's going to be like the wear along the edges and stuff that I'm going to be curious of to see, or maybe some wear in a spot where it was leaning up against some yummy food, whether the worms were able to chew into it or what the story was. So I'm just trying to get a sense of, you know, what kind of a turnout we're starting to get in here. I think even last time we picked through this pile a little bit, and we did see some worms hanging out already. I can see parts of, you know, the food that have been placed in here previously. I saw some cantaloupe, I saw some banana peel, maybe some pumpkin too, and that's not really what they're getting today. It's been fruits and stuff up until now, juicy stuff like that. Although, you know, the stuff they're getting today, carrots and cabbage, I've always had tremendous success with. So in my book, they're actually perhaps even more favored than some of the other things that you would think they'd like even more. So I have created pretty good sized space in here, you know. As far as bedding goes over here, I've got a variety of large leftover pieces of paper here from previous feedings, places where I didn't want to put in a lot of bedding anymore, older bins, a couple napkins. You know, why don't we make use of some of this stuff? I don't know how much we need. I didn't want to go overboard putting in too much, but I think we could probably use a few pieces of this here to rest our feeding on top of. And this stuff will probably get a good amount of traffic because of that. And as you saw, I think I showed it earlier, right? This is the food they're getting. This is going in the trash anyway, so it doesn't matter if I mess it up. I'm going to pour the whole thing right in. It's frozen. That's also the part of the reason I wanted to just move all the worms away. So that when this frozen stuff goes in, if they don't like it, they can back off. But it won't stay frozen for long. It's been thawing now for a couple hours anyway, so it's softening up, and I broke it up a little bit as well to help the thawing process. So now, you know, that is a lot of food. I'm almost wondering if maybe it would make sense to scoop out some of these large pieces that haven't really gotten contaminated by anything yet. Use them in a future feeding. Some of these real large chunk pieces that are kind of ice balls. If I take a few of those out, perhaps we can tone this feeding down a little bit. I don't know if it needs to be quite this large, although, you know, a lot of people might say what you're really looking at here is, you know, 80% liquid. After, you know, after the stuff starts to thaw and emit its juices, it's going to be not quite as much, and that might be true. That's kind of nice that all those juices are going to flow right down into that paper underneath. So I held on to a few, one piece. I got those other ones there too, but I believe this should be enough, just to sort of give this a little bit of a cover here. Not to try to prevent any worm access or anything like that. It's more, I think, to keep the scent of it down and minimize the interest of any passerby insects. I feel like I've got to pay a little bit more attention to managing bug situations down here in my systems. Sometimes I try to take that approach of ignoring it and it'll go away, like most of the problems in my life. Yeah, just ignore it, it'll go away. No, really. You know, it's not out of control, but it is annoying. So I'm trying to see what I could do about getting the bug numbers down here reduced to a certain bit. I do have, I forgot that I replenished my stock of this stuff, this shredded paper mix, prepped bedding. So I think I'm going to grab that too. If you've seen my mix before, you'll notice that this time I went a little bit heavier on the leaf concentration. So I think the worms probably like that. How's that? It's a pretty good cover. Remember, I'm just going to nudge this back so it doesn't take up quite so much room. But like I said, I want it to grow in size, increase in size to remain comfortable and spacious for the worms coming over. So I think that's a pretty good size right there. And I think, you know, from what I could tell from picking around that finished castings to aerate it, still a lot of worms to be coerced over into this area. It's not even so much coercion, you know, because it's really just trying to lay out the welcome mat and prepare a space that's really cozy for them in the end. I guess the only concern is that, you know, some of them might not realize that that's going on, and they might be feeling kind of stuck out in the material that's drying out and becoming inhospitable for them. I don't know, is that where kind of Darwin's survival of the fittest thinking comes in? Get the smart ones to move over, and whatever happens to the remainders is whatever happens to them. I don't know, I don't think so. I don't think there's a whole lot of distinction between smart and stupid worms. I think they're all pretty smart. Alright, so I guess the only thing remaining here is what I like to do is kind of, you know, level things off. I'm glad we didn't bring the level up quite so much between reducing its overall space in the container, and by fluffing it up we've kind of brought its level up pretty good, but it's almost equal to the feeding area, which makes it look pretty neat and orderly. So you might have noticed I did swap out the plastic covering. In the past I had been running a bubble wrap covering the whole system, and that's what was covering our feeding area up until last time. I've reused that bubble wrap in one of my newly built systems that we saw earlier. So in its place I put this smaller, somewhat lighter and more flexible and kind of easier to shape and stick into these corners and everything. I like the way it kind of fills in all the little gaps, and this way I could feel really good about the moisture in here. Now, you know, I thought about bringing the spray bottle in. Yeah, I mentioned it earlier. I thought that if it was necessary to do so, we could moisten this stuff. And to me, it seems like all that cabbage is just going to create an abundance of moisture over there. It's not going to be a problem. It's going to, you know, even help dampen some of this stuff. This stuff is all prepared with moisture in it too, but even this will get, you know, more inundated with moisture as that food starts to kick it off. So I think we're going to be in good shape as far as, you know, creating a nice damp comfortable spot for the worms to be drawn over to, and hopefully stay in, you know, not come over for the food and then just leave, go back out into the finished compost. I want them to remain in here and stay. So I think that's pretty much it. I've only got a few things I've got to clean up and put away, but I'm not going to keep you around for that because that's boring. What do you think? How long is it going to take for the remainder of these worms to move out? You know, is the drying looking good? I think it is. You know, just relative to what I remember it being like, you know, just 12 days ago when we last checked in. Definitely seems like the material's heading in the right direction, and, you know, as it dries, I think the worms are going to be more and more inclined to go find a better spot. More moisture, more food, and, you know, could take another couple weeks, but I'm in no hurry. We'll see how it goes. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.